Spectral Throw projectors are able to hit a target again after every 225 milliseconds. So what that means in practice is that you can get multiple hits per attack. So with Sniper's Mark here, I should get 5 to 6 hits usually. So due to the fact that it can hit so many times per attack, and a pretty high DPS effectiveness of 125% with a attack speed multiplier of 10%. Spectral Throw is a very powerful attack skill. So the cons of Spectral Throw are, there's a bit of a ramp time because Spectral Throw projectors are very slow. Also, if your target dashes away, your projectors probably won't connect with your opponent, and also you need to position your character properly, or otherwise you won't be able to get 5 to 6 hits per attack. And it's definitely not a beginner friendly skill because you also need to know how to gear, especially in early campaign, because Spectral Throw doesn't have flat damage added to the skill itself, so you will need to know how to gear your character properly. So in 3.24 Sniper's Mark got a nerf. We only have 2 splits at all gem levels, and what that means, when a Spectral Throw projectile hits a marked enemy, the splitting behavior has changed with only 2 splits, which means we have to reduce our projectile speed to 20% to get at least 5 hits for every attack. If you don't do that, there are some cases, well, I'm gonna demonstrate that, well, you will get only 2 or 3 hits. Has become very inconsistent. So here I only have 2 hits, but if I go back to 20%, I will usually get 5 to 6 hits, or sometimes even more. So your alternatives, so to deal with, so normally you pick these nodes, you would go Dex-Stacking, you pick ballistics, and you get another 20% from the minor ascendancy notables. You can't do that anymore, so you have to avoid this node, or you have to take these reduced projectile speed nodes. So to get 5 projectile hits, you don't want to get 5 hits per projectile. You don't want to stand too close to the enemy. So ideally you position your opponent at like 90% of the maximum distance that your Spectral Throw projectile can travel. Doing it this way allows you to get 5 plus 5 hits consistently. Alternatively, you could, instead of Sniper's Mark, you could also use Assassin's Mark, but you will also need 20% projectile speed, otherwise with Assassin's Mark you will only get 4 hits consistently if you have 40% projectile speed. So Spectral Throw has no flat damage added to the gem. In the first 2 acts you will rely on your gear to give you flat damage. This is why it is, in my opinion, necessary to start with a duelist move. And what that will do is give you a chance to bleed for a little bit of added physical damage, as well as you can buy an iron ring with the extra wisdom scrolls you get. You also get 2 swords at the start with duelist. So Spectral Throw doesn't have any weapon restrictions. You can use a 2-hander. Now, so I would just use any weapon that you can find that is strong and is an upgrade to your current weapons. So I've prepared a day 1 Spectral Throw PoB, and it uses pretty basic gear. I have added instructions to the description of the items. So there's a change that I've made to what I've done in previous league, namely the Diamond Flask with the mod, chance to gain a flask charge when you deal a critical strike. And because Spectral Throw hits very often due to having 225 milliseconds hit timer, you can sustain this flask with enough crit chance. So I'm using, in this PoB, I'm using a Diamond Flask because it only consumes 20 charges instead of 30 that most other flasks do. And you need to pay attention to your crit chance. If you have enough crit chance, you'll be able to sustain this basically permanently. And ideally, as a suffix, you get increased attack speed, but if you don't, it's fine too. So normally, last league I suggested to basically to follow this PoB for early mid game, but because Dex-Stacking Gear was so accessible early on, I don't think it's necessary to follow this anymore. So you would just move straight away from day 1 PoB, maybe upgrade to a 6 link and just move straight to Dex-Stacking Midgame. But if you need, if for some reason Dex-Stacking Gear is not accessible early on, you can follow this gear, this PoB. So for Dex-Stacking Midgame, so why do we use Dex-Stacking? There are a couple reasons, namely one of them being the claw Hand of Thought in motion. And what that claw does, it adds lightning damage to attacks with this weapon per 10 dexterity. So 1k dexterity is actually fairly easy to get with a few pass tree, of course, with these notables and some dexterity on your gear. It doesn't need to be very high. And with 1000 dexterity, you get an average of 500 lightning damage to attacks. So 100 to 1000. In addition, it has increased dexterity, increased intelligence, and some crit chance. So really good. A good thing about this is you can target farm this item with Ash Breaches. So it should be relatively easily accessible. Now the other, so what you might find all this that I'm dual wielding. So the main reason for dual wielding is to make use of the attack speed bonus you get when you dual wield, which is 10% more attack speed. And that attack speed is doubled with the Claw Mastery. And also, early on, a shield with increased dexterity implicit is not very common. And this claw also acts kind of as a stat stick because it gives us increased dexterity. So next, Fractral Thought's very powerful helmet for Dex stackers. For some reason, it's very common, typically only a 1C unique. Gives us increased dexterity, increased elemental damage based on how much dexterity we have, and also gives us crit multi. Pretty much the best item for our helmet slot. The rest of the gear is pretty basic, a bit of dexterity, resistances, maybe attack speed, fill out your attributes. And you want a brutal restraint. What that will do is add dexterity to your small passive nodes, and it adds stats to your notables in range. Increased dexterity is your #1 stat that you're looking for. So this is your mid-game Dex stacking. So for late game, we get a few upgrades, namely a corruption implicit with the mod chance to gain power charge and critical strike. That is because we don't have any other way to generate power charges. You could use Assassin's Mark, but it is, in my opinion, worse than Sniper's Mark, especially if you're very close to crit capped. So what you can do is just get this power charge and crit corruption implicit. Ideally, you also want a maximum power charge corruption implicit on your Fractral Thoughts. And then you also want a grasping mail. So you get grasping mails by vendoring 60 breach rings, and it will yield you a grasping mail with the item level of the lowest item level ring that you sold. And if you're lucky, you can get the breach specific modifier increased attack speed per dexterity, but it's very unlikely that you will farm this yourself. What's going to happen is probably that you buy this from someone else, since this mod is rather rare. But this is basically the end game mod that you want to have, since it gives a lot of damage. And then you want synthesized amulets with the implicit increased dexterity, and ideally you get the brutal restraint with the number 1475, because it has a lot of notables with increased dexterity. And then you also want a cluster jewel setup. Now the best cluster jewel in terms of DPS. So I personally like to use Fan of Blades with a large cluster jewel with claw attacks deal increased damage, using the notable Fan of Blades because it adds an extra projectile which improves my clear. But if you want to go for just pure DPS, you want a large cluster with 12 passives and the modifier that makes it so that as Malport passive skills have 35% increased effect. And then you also want, so add small passive with increased effect, You want flat dexterity and increased attack speed, and that would be your best DPS option. So 12 passives in these mods. But this is very difficult to craft. It might cost you a lot.